Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Cribell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Christopher Chalfont, who is the creator and developer for the fantastic new app that's come out for podcast listeners and for podcasters as well, which is called Chatpods. Hey, Christopher, thanks for speaking with me today.
Hey, Marv, thanks for having me on.
Not a problem at all. So what was your own introduction to the world of podcast?
My first introduction to podcasts was probably through YouTube just years ago, starting to try to educate myself around business and technology and teaching myself to program.
Yep.
YouTube videos are oftentimes podcasts, so that acted as kind of a bridge to, going into podcast apps like Spotify is the one I use primarily now. So there's some good AI podcasts I would listen to. There's like Lex Friedman, who has like a wide array of different types of people and topics related to technology, and then there's just so many different topics. That's what's drawn me to it, I guess. There's like such a variety of different perspectives.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a later point in here, is the variation in podcasting is incredible. I've said before that whatever subject you are interested in, there will very likely be a podcast out there that will speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I love them, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even to the degree of, I follow a podcast that's all about the world of portable sanitization, and it goes into great detail about that, which is like, would somebody really do a podcast about that? Well, yes, they have. If you're into that sort of thing, and you want to, but like portable toilet systems, and things. Yeah, there's somebody who talks about them, and now the history of them. What they're made of, what the best sort of equipment for whatever you're going to use is, and things like that. And he interviews people that are in the business as well, so to speak, in the business, and making sure that you do your business.
Yeah, I might have to give that a listen. You should send it over.
I think it's called Get Flushed.
Get Flushed. All right. I'll check it out.
I think at the most, I think the 15 minutes at the most, those episodes. So they're not very long, which is, sort of fits with going to the toilet, because you never want to be long with that either.
Yeah. Well, that's another benefit of podcasts, is that there's all different lengths. You can find everything from 5 minutes to 5 hours.
The 5 or 6 hour ones are usually the history podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the sagas. You got to put it down and pick it back up again.
So from being someone who was checking out podcasts on YouTube and on all these other podcasting streaming services, what made you then suddenly decide that you're right, something was needed that was independent? It's almost like a grand central station of podcast listeners to find what they're looking for, and eventually podcasters to be able to link with them as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like the Grand Central Station analogy. So it was about a year ago that I was kind of in between. I always have to have like some kind of project that I'm working on, even on the side.
Yeah.
So I was kind of in between those little projects, and I've been listening to podcasts so much. And I was really surprised that Spotify didn't have some sort of ability to be more social around the podcast, some commenting at least. And same with Apple, same with Google Podcasts. There's a few smaller podcast apps that have that as a feature, but then I see I feel like they're also trying to do a lot of other things. And I just want to focus solely on the socialization around podcasts, because there's always these moments when you're listening to something that you want to either share with others. And oftentimes now it's like a text message. You'll say, hey, check out this podcast. And then, maybe if you're lucky in conversation, you'll talk about it another time. But oftentimes it just kind of drops off and nothing ever comes from that, even though there could have been a rich, fulfilling conversation around that particular podcast or a segment of the podcast. So in a lot of ways, I just wanted to build this app for my own use case. And I talked to enough people, I did enough research that I started to feel confident that others would also be interested in this. So that's when I decided to pull the trigger. It's taken me a lot longer to fully launch than I expected, but we're there now.
You are, absolutely. And, well done on the work that you've done. I mean, what I was hinting at there in a sense is that as much as, we all do it as podcasters, at the end we'll say you can contact us here, and this, and the other, and chat with us and this, and the other. The thing is that even if you give those social network links, the inherent problem with social networking is that if you don't pay attention to it all of the time, it changes constantly. So you will miss certain things. So as a podcaster, it can get irritating because you've got a wealth of things to be able to keep in touch with in your personal profiles and everything else, this, that, and the other. You could almost miss this connectivity with the listener, which is awful, because that's 100% something that you really need to do as a podcaster, is be able to do that. And so having somewhere that is like a conduit for people to be able to communicate in that way gives a place where then 100% that you're not going to lose that information with the algorithms that are in place with all of the other social networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a place that not only do you have everyone else's conversations, but you have your own, and you have a place on your profile where you can go and see the comments that you made previously. And, that'll help keep catalogs of the podcast episodes that you listen to. And, right now I've laid the foundation for what can be a lot of beneficial features built in the future. So that I'm going to do my best to listen to users and listen to feedback and just kind of continue to improve the product as much as I can.
I mean, in some cases, like you said, this subject, which, so when this comes out, the episode I'm about to mention will have come out. I mean, it's already available in video form on another feed at the moment on YouTube. But I had a conversation with a group of podcasters about AI, for instance. And the thing is that even in that situation, because we had an hour and 15 minutes, one of the people was busy and we had a specific period or whatever, and we didn't even touch the surface of all the items that I'd got written down as points to look at. We only touched like one or two items, and it was all about the debate of it. But that explains how some of these subjects are so full, they've got so rich a possibility there that it's almost like one of those good films that you go to see that makes a point, and you go there afterwards after you've seen the film, you carry on talking about it between yourself and your friends. Oh, did you see this film? Or in this case, did you listen to this podcast? It was all about this. What did you think? Well, I've heard this about AI, that they did this, that there's this. I mean, it's such a huge thing. It's like when there's one moment in the show where I'm saying, because there's 6 of us, and someone says, well, how many of you actually use AI? And then a few of us put our hands up, because I mean, I use AI because I've got an iPhone. And, and I said, and then when a couple of them didn't, I said, well, you do realize that when you use Siri and the Amazon device, I'm not going to shout the Amazon device because I have it, and That one, you just have to shout its name and it reacts, and I'm not going there. You can never shut the things up when they start. But, you know, I said to them, if you use those, you are using a type of AI, essentially. And, you know, and I said,
Sure.
most people's cars now are inbuilt with an AI in essence, because diagnostics in a car, they are based on an AI, but not quite to the same degree, but they are. So it's all over the world. So all I'm saying is that it allows a place to continue that conversation further, because as a podcaster, I'm only introducing people to these subjects, or we are introducing people to these subjects.
Right. Exactly.
For them to be able to go from there and be able to take it further and see what is their understanding of it.
Yeah, and then, you know, inevitably there could just be a simple mention of a concept or a topic, you know, and then it just unfolds into this huge other realm of thinking. Like, there's so much potential for the conversation to evolve if you give it that dynamic, you know, text format, but the dynamism of you know, bringing in other conversations over time. It's not just the live feed either, you know, because oftentimes those are just kind of frantic, too much, or the live feed comments are kind of for a different reason. You know, they have their benefits, and maybe at some point we'll get into that space also, but yeah, and what you're saying, it's applicable to just about every different topic too. You know, if it's history, if it's porta potties, you know, inevitably there's some little detail that you can go deeper on.
Obviously, because, you know, we've got podcasts on them. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got the listeners themselves who may actually know a lot. They may actually know a ton about the topic and bring some real substance to the conversation. You know, and in that too, maybe podcasters at some point can use Chatpods to, you know, come up with guests and solve other problems that they're having, you know, other challenges.
I mean, I've pointed out on many times, I love the one or two times where I've spoken with listeners as opposed to podcasters. A lot. I've enjoyed really talking with listeners, because then you're getting it from another angle then, and it's sort of like, as a podcaster, or as me and others as podcasters, I was saying to somebody, I said, that's an interesting side, because then we're learning, what is it about podcasts that they are listening for, that they are interested in, and what they get out of podcast. And in a sense, what can we as podcasters learn from what they tell us?
Yeah. So you're saying, like, basically over time, as listeners are commenting and discussing podcasts, there's a lot of opportunity to inform the podcaster themselves about their own content. Yep. Right. So then you can spin that off maybe into different topics, or, you know, bring in the guests that all the listeners keep suggesting. And you don't have the clutter also of all the other chatter like Twitter and Instagram, because there's so much that is non-podcast related. But I think that podcasts are big enough now that they really deserve their own social platform.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to be.
Hi, this is Zach from Belated Binge Harry Potter, and you're listening to Pods Like Us.
The app itself, then we're going to look at this. How did you develop the app? Whereabouts is it now, and where do you see it going to?
Yeah, so right now I have laid the foundation for a lot of potential features. Yeah. So right now you can go search for a podcast. You can listen to your podcast episodes. We have over 2 million different podcasts on the app. There are ways to try and add a podcast, but if you're having issues finding yours, just let us know through the feedback, and I'll be quick to add them manually. So you can go through, you listen, and you can comment on podcasts as you're listening to them on the episodes. And you can also see a little graph of where the comments are happening and how frequently during the episode. So that's one small thing that can be beneficial to podcasters and to listeners, because maybe you don't want to listen to a 4-hour podcast. You just want to see where the interesting conversation is happening. And, that's really the meat of it, is just the ability to talk about podcast episodes. And then there's small features that will be that I've built so that they can be built upon, so I have profiles. Right now, it's very minimal. You can see your own comments and you can see who you're following. But there's a lot of improvement that's needed there. There's the feed where you can see all the different comments that are happening. And as of right now, until there's more usage, I was planning on just keeping that to be all the different comments. But as time goes on, I think users will want that to be more tailored to themselves, where it's only showing their particular interests, but then having the ability to see all the the entire feed also. And then, there's a lot of other features. Like right now, I'm working on still some basic ones, like the ability to manually change the speeds. So you could just listen to it on 1.5 speed. The ability to, basically easily listen to the following episode of a podcast. I think that's something that I've heard listeners having challenges with, also with other apps. So I think I can solve that problem. And just making it really convenient for exactly how listeners want to listen to podcasts and talk about podcasts. So you can also share your comments.
Yep.
And that's another key thing. If you want to text your friend, you can easily just use the share function, and it'll send them a link and it'll bring them to the app where they can either download or go directly into the app to see the comment that you've shared.
Great.
So, yeah, I think that's the bulk of it.
Another bit that people will be fascinated with that I'm going to touch on in a big way, because I really love it, is the attached blog as well, the blog post that you include, that you've got on there as well, which is very thorough. And shout out to John Terra, who did some great initial blogs for you about the history of podcast. And the blog posts that you yourself and John have written are incredibly thorough and informative, and I think would be a really good source for anybody that's interested in the history of podcasting and the potential future of podcasting as well.
Yeah, thank you. John does some great work, and I'm happy with those articles. A lot of those right now are still AI. The ones you're writing with, the ones that were written by John Terra, that's basically all him. But the others are AI generated through, the prompting and GPT-4, and even the images are also generated by AI. So it's a little bit of an experiment, because I'm not sure how people will interpret that or how they'll feel about reading those content pieces. But SEO benefit too. So I'm open feedback on that also, because it's kind of touchy. It's a little bit of a touchy topic. And my stance is, at this time, is that as long as I'm disclosing it, I don't have a problem with it. It's like, this is AI. This is not a real person. I've reviewed it for any sort of accuracy and flow, but otherwise it is AI. What do you think about that?
Oh, you've hit a topic there. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's intriguing that what AI can do. The only issue potentially is occasionally with the aspect of plagiarism. Sometimes that AI developed or AI created content can sometimes do, but so long as that is looked at and is assigned accordingly, then I don't see really having a problem with that.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Um,
I hope people don't get the wrong message, just because it triggers a lot of feelings. People are thinking it's taking jobs and stuff, but it's a huge conversation. So I don't want to divert.
like all technology, there's a double-edged sword thing to it. So there are good and bad points to both. It depends on how you utilize that technology, as to what you get from it and its ethical points.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
I don't like smart bombs, but I think the idea of having an AI that learns so that people can talk who can't talk normally, I think, there we go.
Yeah, a lot of benefits.
A lot of benefits. But I mean, what do you think of the use? I put technology in podcast because we'll go straight to that one instead now. I would put that because I was thinking of what people use as technology, like, the microphone I'm using, what I use as a mixer, the interface and this, that and the other. But you've hit on another one there without really intending to, which is an intriguing side to it all that some people listening won't realize, that the AI is being used sometimes by podcasters. Graham Class from Classic Studios does a great job of creating AI presenters essentially for his shows, Daily Dad Jokes, the Daily Quiz Show, Get Happy Headlines. I think he does 6 or 7 shows that are AI generated presenters in a sense. And he uses GPT to create his content as well. So you've got that, but then you've also got some podcasters, and I didn't realize this until we had the discussion that we'd recorded with these friends of mine, other podcasters. I didn't realize that some podcasters were using AI to create basically a content for the show that they are going to produce. So the AI generates I don't know whether it's a script essentially, but what they're going to discuss and the points that they'll include.
Yeah, I think it depends on your type of podcast that you're doing, because if you're doing a history podcast, you might get some really good content that's descriptive and well written and accurate, but then you'll get at least the occasional inaccuracy, which could throw off a lot of people depending on how popular your podcast is. So, and that goes for realms beyond podcasts also. But I think there's a lot of people that might be, they want to create some revenue. So you might generate content. I mean, it's an incredible operations tool, for generating ideas, for generating, let's see, like even potential guests. If you're high profile enough, you can go get some interesting people that you wouldn't have thought of before. I don't personally use it for creating podcasts, so I'm sure someone else would have some interesting insights into that. It's touchy. It's touchy because I think also the listener base might not be thrilled, or they may become less interested if they found out that it was all AI generated, like every bit of it, there's a novelty element to it where they might listen to a few. And I'm strictly just hypothesizing here. I have no idea how they'll actually respond. Maybe the content's good enough. Maybe it's quality enough that they'll continue to listen. But since the current AI GPT-4, it's still like a really advanced statistical model that is too technical, to highly technical people, it's not quite as impressive, I think, because we kind of understand that it's just using statistics, deep learning, on deep neural networks, predictive, it's generating the following words and sentences based on prediction of what the prompt is. So on some level, I just don't know if people will be interested enough. I guess that's what I'm trying to say continually. And I could be very wrong on that. And that's also just for this exact moment in time. I'm sure it's going to get better. And I think it's also as good as the user. So you may have someone who's expert in a topic, so they know when to call out issues, and they can review the prompts and make it really high quality without the inaccuracies too. So that's another thought.
Absolutely. Like you said, I mean, we're just going on conjecture here and theory and guesswork, essentially, how we think people would think about these things. Really.
Yeah.
Speaking of technology, what do you think about technology or what people need to make a podcast? Do you think, I mean, some people would say that a cheap, say, $30 microphone that you plug into your laptop is good to start with. And I mean, I'd probably go along that sort of thing where you could start that way and eventually you'll develop and get something a bit better than that. I think it's more about the content that you do. So long as people can hear what you're saying clearly and try your best to make sure that it comes through clearly in a way that people can hear it. So long as your content is there, that is the starting point, I think. I mean, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with that, because if you don't have content, you can have the best production value, high quality video and audio, interesting visual appeal, but if you don't have substance to the words that are being spoken for a podcast, you're not going to keep an audience. So, and in this world where your follower base kind of follows you, people will have, if you have a social media following, you can pretty well just start a podcast and they'll be listening to you. And that's because of the content of your character that they enjoy, watching. So the content of a podcast is of the utmost importance. Absolutely. And I think it can be beneficial to upscale your value in time if that's what you want. If you want to really take it to the next level and make it more of a business, then yeah, you can go that route and try to make a real high quality production. And I see some good podcasts out there doing it. And consistency too.
Yes. Yeah. Consistency. Yeah. Absolutely. If you're releasing episodes, make sure that you try your best to hit those marks on release if you can. The best that you can.
Right. And also consistency of format too, because I think your listeners are expecting a certain format, a certain cadence. If you're doing interviews one-on-one or several people, or, it's like, they may not want you to go do man on the street interviews with random people all of a sudden. But it depends. That's, generic advice for the consistency.
Hey, it's Gil from the Mind Podcast. Today's mind culture and social podcast. And you're listening to Pods Like Us.
This the history of podcast. I touched on that, and that was a great blog that was written by John.
Yep.
So, what's your own understanding of the history of podcast? Do you have like a knowledge of where it comes from, or is that just from John?
That I have to give full credit to John for that article. You know, I said, hey, can you write an article about this topic? I think it needs to be seen. I think people would value it. And he just pumped it out. And I think it's great. I don't have that much of a perspective on podcasts. I've been more of a passive user for, maybe 5, 6 years now. But that's about it. I think I've learned a little bit about the technology behind it now. RSS feeds are pretty interesting, and I think the ecosystem is developing pretty well. It has some ways to go, but I think we're getting there.
I think in the around 20 years since the inception of RSS feeds, I think it's come a really long way.
Okay.
To be honest, because I think it was somewhere around 2002. I'm trying to remember from my own knowledge, without reading John. I've sort of like looked into it. I think it was about 2002 or somewhere around there when RSS was first developed, I think, and then it took a few years for them to do the podcasting thing. I think podcast was 2005 or something. I think the first one or whatever, which had something to do with Adam Curry.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I should probably brush up on my knowledge of the history of podcasting. Yeah, my focus is really just like building something useful right now, like at this exact moment. And I'm heavily using RSS feeds, but it's kind of all I need to know to build that app. Yeah, I mean, Spotify, their acquisition of Anchor has made it really easy for people to go out and create a podcast. So that's just kind of a comment on where we are now. I don't even know what it looked like 15 years ago if someone did want to create a podcast. Like, how was that distributed and consumed by a listener? I really don't know.
It was not easy because you had to sort of like distribute it in a different way, in a sense, because you didn't have the distribution infrastructure. There's a huge amount of distribution available now. You could go all over the place for Acast, Anchor, Podbean, and all these different places.
Right.
The only thing with Anchor that I think niggles some people, but it's what you're into. I don't use Anchor. I know people that do. I don't use Anchor, but I can understand people using it because of its simplicity. And I'm not going to knock Anchor in any way because it does a great service.
Sure.
The only thing that some people pick on it is because of the fact that essentially the whole fact of Anchor owning their property, their product, essentially, and that's where that comes from. But
yeah,
it's what you're wanting to put out there and wanting to get out of the podcast, in essence, before you question this thing with Anchor of them owning it or this, that, and the other. Have you got a podcast that, are you going into it? What are you going into it for? That's why you should make the choice of which distribution service you're going to use. And don't just knock Anchor because of that thing. If you're only doing it for a reason that's, that doesn't really mean anything that shouldn't really be part of the argument.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it kind of reminds me of, at first, I was going to make my app heavily paired with Spotify.
Yeah.
Because they have an API that makes things easy. But then as time went on, I realized that, if they're exclusive to Spotify, they don't allow videos out of their ecosystem. Yeah. So that was a big turnoff for me in like heavily relying on them. And ultimately, I decided to build out my own podcast database so that I wouldn't be dependent on, I wouldn't necessarily always have to play by their rules. Now, I love Spotify. I think it's
Yep.
a great platform, and they've done great things for podcasting. And that's why, our app, you can sync with your Spotify account, and it's a little bit like the flow is not quite optimal, but I don't know, it's maybe for a different conversation. But yeah, ultimately we just want to have all the podcasts in our app, and there's a few that are still exclusive to Spotify that I still wanted to be accessible, and that's the big reason I integrated Spotify into this app, into Chatpods.
That's a problem that there is, though. I will say is that exclusivity with some places, because you find the same with Amazon podcast, for instance. There are some on there. There's a Batman series on there, audio drama. There's a few of them actually, where they are exclusive to Amazon, and you can't get them on any other podcast provider. So you have to go through that, which is it's good in a sense, but the problem with all this is that when you've got exclusivity and somebody's out on a walk or on a run, jogging or something, and all they really want to do in essence is just have their earbuds in, go for the jog, and stay on one, if they can, just stay on one provider, essentially, because they don't want to stop the jog and suddenly go, well, I want to listen to this podcast, so that means I'm going to have to get to Acast, or I'm going to have to go and change and put on the Spotify app, or close that, open up the Google app, open up the Amazon app. And that's what I see as a problem with exclusivity, is it's less user friendly having to change from one app to another app to another app to another app.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I did everything I could to try and see if Apple had some kind of podcast API that I could tap into, because there's also Apple exclusives. And it's not even because they benefit necessarily. It's just because that's how it's emerged. And maybe that podcast just never got around to, making sure that it was available elsewhere. Yeah, I wish they were all everywhere because of exactly what you're saying. And I've been tempted to try and bring in a podcaster and say, hey, be exclusive to my app. But then it kind of goes against what I just said. It might give people a value, like enough pull to come over and be inside the app. But at the same time, I want to just focus on usability for the user, what the user wants, like above everything. So if it's not exclusivity that the user wants, then I'm probably not going to do it.
I'm going to quote. Here we go. I bet you never thought this was going to happen today. I'm going to quote now from Daniel Defoe's Three Musketeers. You are one for all. That's what you're trying to do.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
One for all and all for one.
More or less, yeah. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I can't predict the future, but that is the goal.
So shall I not go on to the next point then, of the world of tomorrow?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bob Jeffy from the Daily Dad Jokes podcast. You're listening to Pods Like Us. By the way, do you know where whales and dolphins get their news? From podcasts. Bye for now.
What do you see in the future then for podcast and for your? We've already touched on it a bit, the podcast, and where you think podcasting can go.
Yeah. So I think it can go in a few different directions. And I think it's either like some level of centralization or decentralization, or like a bundling, unbundling kind of effect. Spotify has been trying for a number of years to be the number one podcast app, and they've done a pretty good job, but it's not good enough. There's still a ton of people who don't use Spotify for whatever reason, and then there's a lot of people who are podcasters and podcast listeners that go to podcasts because they're not trying to get information from one single source. So I'm thinking that in the future, there will be the ability to, go to several apps. My goal personally is to consolidate the conversation. I think it would be more convenient for everyone if the unification of all socialization around podcasts on the internet was inside of Chatpods. And it's more of a convenience thing than a centralization thing. And I think there's some principles that need to hold true in order to fulfill that vision. So for one is basically, freedom of speech to the greatest extent of the law, because that's part of why people go to podcasts, is because it's just unfiltered in all different directions. You can hear things that I definitely don't want to hear, like, things that are pornographic or, gory murder, I'm not into that stuff. But, if that's what you're looking for, then, you have the right to go and listen to it. So, our stance as a company is to maintain that to the best of our abilities, within the realm of the law, and hold true to that absolutely, into the future. And this way we can be trusted to be like a pseudo centralized place where all the conversations can happen. And I say pseudo centralized because there are possible approaches to the future that maybe I can't even think about right now, but might be able to be innovated on, incorporation with the blockchain or some other new technology that favors decentralization, or, opening up an API to commenting where other apps can use the same set of comments or something like that. So the future of podcasting I see is one where everyone is using Chatpods because it is the best app for podcasting. And there probably will still be some exclusives out there, but that's the future that I see.
Yep. I mean, I have a slight thing.
I know it's ambitious.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look into the future. I have a slight worry about, with the influx recently of, shall we say, the big produced shows. In some ways, it almost becoming, because in essence, when podcasting first came about, it was very much like in the UK and this area we had pirate radio, and I think you had pirate radio all over the world, which was like stations that were not corporation based. In essence, it's almost like, so in the UK you have a podcast which is completely different back then to what you had on the radio, and more in a sense you're getting content from some companies like the BBC and all these other places where essentially it's not got that element to it anymore. It's like a radio show whenever you want to hear it, which is, I mean, I'm not putting that down. I like that. I listen to a lot of BBC biographies, and that's a wonderful thing, is you can listen to them comfortable and whatever. It's just that there's the fear that hopefully that won't be the case where they try to centralize it and make it like that rigidly, because because then it's making it too that way, if you know what I mean. There's no difference then between a podcast and listening to a radio show.
Right. And, another dynamic that happens with these companies is they get kind of bought by the advertisers. So, and then they're beholden to the advertisers. So I have some ideas I'm not quite ready to disclose, but I think there's an approach that would be appropriate, that it would require people to pay, but it would be in with the goal of not having advertisers on the platform directly. And I don't want to hold too tightly to that, because I want to leave open the option for podcasters themselves to possibly advertise on the platform, or somehow find more listeners through Chatpods. But having some company like advertise televisions or advertise, PlayStations or video games or something, like, I don't really want to do that. And I'm hesitant to say I never will, because, I would like to make a little money. I would like, at the very least, to sustain my, development efforts on this app without having to worry about other work. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to say I'll never advertise, but my goal is to produce enough value that people are actually willing to pay just a little bit, and possibly try to loop in podcasters to where they can make a little money also. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's another touchy subject in itself, because of advertising on social networks and things. But in a sense, you're providing a service, and you can see it from the other point of view. It's a tricky one, because I can see why people who develop these things, could feasibly look at this side of advertising and think, well, it does help us to make the system better, because we're actually getting paid to actually to actually do that. But it's a two-sided thing, do people want to pay, or do they want it free? But with advertising, it's that sort of, it's a subject and a half right there.
Yeah, and I think the only real risk, it could sound benign. It's like, oh, I'm just advertising to make a little money and that kind of thing. But when you see the capture happening, like the fact that I think it's like 70 or 80% of all advertising on United States television networks are for pharmaceutical companies. You see that there is some incentive for the television stations to favor them. It's just a fact, and it happens on, it's happened on Twitter. It's happened in a lot of different areas where advertising happens. So that's another approach that I have to, be a little cautious about.
All I will say on the Twitter thing, and actually, it's the same all over. There's something happening at this moment. We're in a moment where there are changes afoot on a lot of things, technology-wise and social media-wise. We're in a certain, we're in a place now where things are going to change, but in a way, you can't see how things are going to change. And, some people might think, oh, I don't know what's going to happen this, there, and there, and there. But it's almost like, well, it's almost like you almost have to push yourself and just go, do you know what? Let's just see where it goes, in a sense. And so that's what I'll say there. That's sort of like, I'm just trying to be more positive about it and put a positive sheen on the way that things are changing all over. Yeah.
Sure. And, it's changing at a pace that's unprecedented, and in a way that's unprecedented, because there's so many different pockets of or siloed idea structures. People, they get their information from very specific places, and others get theirs from somewhere else. So it's making it challenging to align at times, and it's making the market harder to predict in terms of like, well, what products will succeed? What will Twitter be in 5 years? Will it be, a super successful X.com, or will people not be so thrilled about that approach? And then they go off and use other platforms. It's really hard to predict.
I mean, I'm not a particular fan of we've gone off in this subject now, and I wasn't going to. But the thing of charging people for the blue tick or whatever, and the different levels of that, I can see why that, to use, I can see why that irritates people. But there's also another side to that, which is, if they were able to make money from these people, these celebrities, or these people who are high profile, in a sense, that might help them to keep Twitter running along as it is and cut down on the advertising and still keep the service as it is, or even better it, in a sense. And that's probably the way that they're looking at it, to be honest. But even though I have my problems with Elon Musk anyway, but it's what it is. Maybe they're just trying to see how things can be done better or differently.
Well, sure. No, I think it was pretty innovative. It's something I've considered also. And the best argument for it is the advent of generative AI bots. When we're faced with a lot of possible disinformation in all different directions. I mean, it could just be spam. It could be all kinds of different things that clutter your experience of a social platform. So I've thought, well, how am I going to address that into the future? And the verified account approach is tempting because it seems fair. You're like, hey, you're using this app. We want to make sure that you're not a bot. So you're going to pay a little bit of money here. And we'll give you a blue tick. It'll make you have a nice little feeling inside, and people will know this is accurate. But on the flip side of that, it's like people kind of want anonymity with some of they're posting. Maybe they have really good reason to. Maybe they're expressing some political views that they don't particularly want their colleagues to know about.
Yeah.
Or, maybe they're interested in a topic that they just don't want their personal identity associated with. So that's where the blue tick is challenging for me. I would like to avoid it if I can, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Also, for a lot of independent podcasters, it's a bit expensive as well for us to pay that out to get a blue tick to say, look, Pods Like Us, I am Marv. I am the person behind Pods Like Us. I want the blue tick, but I can't afford that much money.
Yeah. And I wouldn't want to do that to podcasters. I would want to give podcasters the blue tick without anything because I want you on the platform. And at some point, I'm going to design a flow that will be like an automatic verification. I have it in my mind, but the timing is, I have a backlog of a lot of different features that I want to implement, and I'm the only one working on this right now. And for the most part, it's part-time. And like I've been working on this for a little over a year, all just in my spare time. Like after my full-time job. And so it's a lot of work. I want to implement that feature. And like I said, I do want to actually make podcasters money if I can. And I think that there's some opportunity for that. Like I said, I'm not quite ready to disclose this idea, but it will be coming hopefully in the next month or so.
Well, at the moment, you've developed an app or a software that is very useful for the listener. So, as a person, who is a lover of podcasters and a podcaster as well, so I love listening to podcasts and I love making them. At the moment, it's good that you're looking at that side of it at the moment for the listeners, because that, if you carry on with that, you're making that a better system for them. And once you've got that to the level that you want to get it at, then go to the world of the podcasters themselves, to go into that area for the for the app, essentially, and then we'll come on board then when you've got the listeners there and you've got them a good service that they really enjoy. Then we can come on as podcasters when you get that in line and up and running and sorted out. And then they'll have someone to come to then. Essentially, I'm saying I like the idea that you're getting it sorted for the listener first, and then you'll come to this later, because you're making it the best experience for them before we come online as the creators.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. That makes sense.
And I know, as I've spoken with a few people in the time that we've been talking, I've been talking with other podcasters, and we're all in line for quite a few of us have discussed and said that we're happy about this, and we're really looking forward to seeing where it goes to in the future. That's for sure.
That's great. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I mean, if you feel inclined, encourage people to use it and give me the most critical feedback. Like, I want to hear if they think it's terrible and how in every way, so that I can really make it excellent. So that's my goal.
It's like all platforms, they start off at one sort of level, and it's almost like a podcast as well, where you start off, your episode 1 is nothing like episode 100. There's so much difference between episode 1, episode 100, and it's the same with all things in technology. Where you are here with software is not where you'll be. I mean, the original Microsoft Windows is not the same as Microsoft Windows now. Do you know what I mean? It changes over time and adapts. And
the
evolves.
Iteration, yeah, absolutely.
And Chris is open, just like he said. There's the feedback option there. So if you have any suggestions for things that could be used that he might not have thought of, or he might have thought of, but you don't realise, he's open to you contacting him through that and letting him know what you like about it and things that you think could be placed in there to make it work better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and right now you can find it on the Apple App Store. I'm working on Android, so I'm very close to getting that build out. On Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I feel like I'm missing one of them, but yeah, on social media, Chatpods.
Have you gone over to Threads yet?
I've checked it out. I tried to access it through the web a few times, but I don't think they have a web app.
No, they've not got the web for it yet. No.
So whenever they do that, I'll probably start using it, just for more exposure. Oh yeah, Facebook. That's the other one.
I think Threads is an interesting beginning. Like people keep saying, it's very similar to X or Twitter, as everybody will probably continue to call it. There's certain things that make it a bit different, like, because for the most part, Threads is linked through your Instagram account, because it's part of Meta. So
yeah,
it's interesting. So it keeps your profile details from your Instagram account. It has that similar, like, the Twitter sort of like thing with it, but you can put more pictures on it if you want to, and you can attach more videos than you can on a Twitter. You've got the same limitation there as you do with Instagram, essentially. So you could put, I think, 10 photographs or videos in a feed with your message, which you've got a limit on Twitter of 4, I think it is. So there's that makes it sort of interesting.
Mhm.
But it's, in a way, it's not that much different to Twitter. So what do I put on Twitter that I don't put on Threads, or what do I put on Threads to make it different to the Twitter account? Because I always try to approach each different social media as to what that works with that way. So how would you use that to this, that, and the other? So yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's really just a flex of Mark Zuckerberg showing, hey, we can do this pretty easily, and we already have a huge user base that we can leverage. Um, so I don't know, it's I believe that the market will decide, and it's interesting because there's this kind of fragmentation of social media now, and there's others coming on, and I don't know how it will evolve. Um, but I'm just trying to be the leader in the podcast social media.
Hey, this is Brian with Concerts That Made Us podcast, and you're listening to Pods Like Us, a great show about other great shows.
How do different podcasts get put onto the app? Essentially, how do you get those shows on there? Because there are shows that aren't on there at the moment that are friends of mine, and
Right.
I'm thinking how that happens. Is it just randomly you look for podcasts and you add them on as you find them?
Yeah. So right now it has all the podcasts that should be on Google. So Google Podcasts are more open.
Yeah.
And there's also the ability to like manually type in a podcast. So that will search all of the. So the way that it syncs with Spotify too. So
Yep.
there might be some on Spotify, but not on Apple, vice versa. So I do have a button there that you as a user can go and try to add a podcast.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit smart, so it goes and it searches the internet, it searches Google and Spotify for a podcast. And then if it doesn't come back and you don't find what you're looking for, I just ask the user for feedback, and I try to, if I need to, I can go and manually add the podcast to my database.
Yep.
So that's the idea right now. It's about as good as I can do at this point. But I wanted to make sure that I was independent from all other platforms.
Yeah.
So I built out my own, full podcast database.
That's great. So are you basically, for that purpose, are you developing a form of AI yourself to be able to do that? Or is it done from a manual point of view?
So right now that none of that's AI. It's automated, so
Yeah.
I'm a programmer. I've automated a good amount of that, but sometimes you still have to do the dirty work and do it manually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to people if they were making a podcast of their own?
If they're making a podcast of their own, I would say identify what you're really interested in and come up with a format that you enjoy. If it's one-on-one conversations, if it's group chats, if it's, interviews with random people on the street, if it's a video blog kind of thing, and just purely informative, any different format, and then create good content around your interest. Make sure that people you bring on or information that you distribute is really good quality. And that being more important, like we've said, more important than the audio quality or the video quality, it's really the content. And then maintaining consistency over time and listening to what your listeners have to say about your podcast, and Be open to being a little flexible, and stick with it. It takes time to cultivate any sort of audience. Oftentimes, it's more than 100 episodes. So don't get discouraged when you feel like no one's listening, because maybe at some point they will. And I would also say you can use Chatpods to go and see what people are thinking about your podcast, and you can encourage them to go comment and get some good feedback on your podcast there.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. And what sort of podcast do you actually listen to yourself? Or another way to put this, alternatively, are there any shows out there that you think people should check out?
Yeah, so I definitely like self-development kind of stuff. So Andrew Huberman has been a really good science-based health kind of podcast. He gives actionable advice. He's a Stanford neuroscientist, really sharp guy, and he brings on experts across all kinds of different realms of health and mindset. He's really good. If you're interested in AI, there's also the NVIDIA AI podcast. It's really high quality, pretty technical for a technical audience. And those are my go-tos. I like the All In podcast to get a sense of kind of where the economy is. It's an interesting kind of fun. They have some back and forth banter that can be entertaining, depending on what you're looking for. And then there's also, I like Lex Friedman. He gives pretty good interviews with a wide variety of different people, and he leans on the technical side too. So yeah, those would be some of my recommendations.
I need to check
How
out
about you? Do you
NVIDIA.
have some?
What do I listen to? I listen to all sorts of podcasts. There's some that I think people should listen to, then don't. I like things like there's a show from Australia called A Breath of Fresh Air, where Sandy Kay will speak to people. It's a one-on-one essentially. She talks to like people from the music industry most of the time, sometimes from other industries, like almost famous people from back in the day. And it's a nice 52-minute long form chat with somebody that you'd normally only have on a show that's 15 minutes or 5-minute block of, let's get what we need to promote this person's film or this person's new album. It's more of a longer form, and they come out with some interesting things in there, and the way that it's put together. I'm just mentioning that one because she doesn't get very many numbers, which I don't understand at all, because of the quality that it is, because it is really well produced for what show it is. I'll shout that one out. If I shout out every single podcast I listen to, I'll need quite a few episodes just to shout all the shows that are in my feed, to be honest.
I know what you mean, for sure. And that's another thing that I've been reflecting on for Chatpods, is to help organize those. I feel like all the apps, they don't really do a great job of organizing your own podcast preferences and episodes that you need to keep in line. So that's another user interface thing I'm reflecting on right now for improvements. And I would say, as a bonus to advice to podcasters, make sure you're getting your podcast out there. It's not always build it and they will come. Sometimes you have to put in the effort to show people that you're even there.
Yeah. Make sure that you promote it on the social networks that you've got, so that people know it's out there, because there will always be people that are looking for something, don't know that it's there because they've not heard the show before. And then, you'll get the subscribers if they like your content.
Absolutely.
Anyway, where can people find you and get hold of you then, Chris?
So I personally am on LinkedIn. That's pretty much my only social profile. And then I have Chatpods on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you search Chatpods, it'll say something like the ultimate podcast community or podcast hub. You can find the app on the Apple App Store and soon to be the Android Play Store. And you can find me on Chatpods.
Yep. Chatpods, you can find chatpods.app, by the way.
That's right. Yes. Thank you.
That's fine. And on there, you've got it's simple enough. You're there. You've got the front page. You can click the menu thing in the corner to find what you're after. But there's a really good blog section there as well with, like I said, lots of blogs about podcast if you're interested in it, and everything you've ever wanted to know about the world of podcasting is right there.
Thank you.
That's okay. You can find Pods Like Us on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.